packet pushers.
Welcome to Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. On today's sponsored episode, we talked to Bowtie Security about its secure network access offering. And if you're thinking, well, just sounds like another way to say VPN, you're going to want to think again. Bowtie's approach incorporates zero trust network access, a secure web gateway, CASB, and more. And we're really digging into how Bowtie works, not just the marketing fluff, how it positions itself against competitors in the SASE market, why they don't think they're actually in the SASE market, and that SASE is yesterday's answer to the problem. And Drew, we heard a couple things. So let me just tell you, you're going to be hearing our guest from Bowtie, William Eshagh, who's the CEO and co-founder, and Justin Francesconi, who's the COO and co-founder. And Drew, what I was getting to is, they said some interesting things. Justin kind of pitched this as like the edge security fabric solution instead of SASE. I was curious how that resonated with you.
Yeah, categories are interesting. And I understand as a startup, they're trying to distinguish themselves in a very highly competitive market with some huge competitors. So they're trying to think of ways to position themselves. I do think, though, they have a really interesting approach to securing network access that is way beyond a VPN. And I think it differentiates well from SASE. So I think the best thing to do is just take a listen to this episode and see what you think.
Yeah. And guys, we'll tell you this, working in the zero trust and ZTNA space, they are doing things differently. And as a network operator, William made the comment, something along the lines of your network is where your user is. And it's all about reducing complexity and increasing security. And I haven't tried this product yet, but it does sound like they have an opportunity to deliver on that. So let's get going.
So William and Justin, welcome to Packet Protector. Bowtie is providing secure remote network access, and that might sound like a VPN, but you're doing more than that. So can you give us a little bit of background on the company's approach, essentially, to security?
Yeah, happy to. And in my own search for the truth, I've come across Packet Protector and packet pushers on many occasions. So it's wonderful to be talking to you today.
Oh, thank you.
The first thing I'll say is you mentioned VPN and remote access. When you start talking about a VPN, concepts of legacy start jumping to the front of mind. And when you start talking about remote network access, that presumes that there is something opposite of remote, right? That there would be local, or that there would be near me, or something better than remote. A remote being this far away, seldom used, undesirable. That's not what we're trying to do here. With Bowtie, what we're saying is that we need a new solution to how our networks are built and operated, new concepts. And this is born out of our own lived experience. So prior to Bowtie, I was leading infrastructure and security for a number of companies, most recently an aerospace one. And when you start talking about high value assets or high value information, for aerospace, you can imagine it'd be a spacecraft, a rocket, something to that effect. But you can abstract that out to any asset that really means a lot to you and is, I don't know, we'll call it sensitive or fragile or something that you just do not want to overly expose.
Mm-hmm.
In that environment, I had been building networks the way that they had been built, the way I have heard them, on your show talked about being built for a long time. And I found the solution space lacking. It left me, at least with the tooling and the approaches that I was employing, I'm going to say this, blind, deaf, and dumb. I didn't know what was going through my network. I didn't have good controls. I didn't have good visibility. I couldn't respond. I was just racing to make sure that those packets kept flowing because the system needed to stay online. And I knew it wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we needed to do was we needed to rethink, how are we approaching this problem? Going to the basis of your question, remote access. With Bowtie, what we've built is a distributed platform. It's a overlay solution. It is a mesh solution. And its core thesis is that the network is where the user is. That's what you're trying to do. You're connecting where your users are, connecting to the resources that they need.
Oh, I like that.
Some of those resources might be private, not generally accessible to the public internet, but very often those resources are on the public internet. But nonetheless, we're trying to get better control and visibility into who's accessing these resources, while at the same time, and this is really critically important, making it easier to use. I have a story that I like to tell about VPNs. Back in my aerospace days, my former CEO wanted to access something, quote unquote, on the VPN.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, let's get that going. So please install the software. He did it. He called me. He says, I still can't access it. I'm like, well, did you install the VPN? He's like, yeah. I'm like, did you turn it on? He's like, what do you mean, did I turn it on? What is this on-off thing? What do I have to do? And it just fell apart. And I think at the end, he just ultimately gave up. What we're talking about is not rooted in legacy. What we're talking about is the problems and the challenges that organizations are facing today, getting their users access to what they need with as little drama as possible, while simultaneously improving the operator or administrator's ability to get them to what they need, have visibility into when it doesn't go well, provide controls as to who may access what, but with as little drama as possible. So we're not considering ourselves a remote access solution. It is a secure access network product solution, foundational. This is something that you build all of your access modalities on top of. And then when your user opens up their computer, they're not asked to pick up like a phone, dial in, like a dial-up modem, turn this thing on, and then you'll be good to go. It's just you open your computer, and by the time it recognizes your face or your thumbprint is read, whatever you're doing to get in, that's it. You connect to the network and you're off to the races. That's what we're building. It is a secure access product.
I wish you guys listening could see William because he's so animated. Drew, we're going to have to talk to the production team about getting this up on YouTube, I think, at some point. So, William, it sounds like you're a co-founder there with Justin.
Yes.
So you guys made a product, not just because you dreamed up something that most of us didn't actually need, but you were a practitioner who found a need and you were trying to fill a gap with an actual usable product.
Absolutely. I would go further and say I did not want to build a product. That was the end state. I was operating my system, struggling with it, trying so many different variations, different iterations, different products, different approaches, just finding them all lacking in their own unique way, taping things together, watching the tape fall off and users complain and systems fail. And so Bowtie is the result of needing a solution that at the time I couldn't see anywhere else.
And back to Drew's question, just because I don't want to deflect from that. So it's not remote access because it's just take the remote out. It's just securing access, not VPN, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like you guys are living somewhere in, zero trust access, ZTNA, SASE, SSC. What's the label you give your solution?
If I'm reaching into the label bucket, the closest label, I think, is the SASE label. And the reason for that is we are providing access, as I said, public, private, doesn't matter. We are identifying who you are, we're identifying where you're coming from, and we are enabling you to get to what you need done, and then that's the end of the conversation. If you don't interact with us at all, no UI prompts, no touch points, that's our greatest success. Still providing the value, but without interfering with the user to the greatest extent possible. But where we differ is in how we're achieving this outcome. If you walk the aisleway at the store and look for all of the SASE boxes, nearly all of them are providing someone else's network for you to access. And then what they're asking you to do is just connect all your stuff to me. I am the central nexus. You can leverage me to do everything that you need to do. We're skipping over a really important design flaw when we look at the problem that way, which is if you invest all your trust in a third party, you have created a single point of failure. Anything goes wrong with that friend of yours, I'm going to call them a friend here only colloquially, the effects are devastating to the companies that have just dumped all their trust into this organization. Zero trust, right? One of those labels that you mentioned, and by the way, when we were starting this, zero trust is an interesting marketing term that has gotten all kinds of different perspectives associated with it, but let's just go with it. Zero trust, except all these vendors are saying, trust me to get you to zero trust.
Yeah.
Right? There's one preliminary mega trust beacon at the beginning that we're just kind of ignoring. And so Bowtie goes about it differently. What we're doing is we're saying the capabilities that spark to mind when you think of SASE, if you accepted that label into your life, there are certain things that you're looking for your SASE product to provide to you. That is the private access, that's web access, that's SaaS access, and all of those capabilities are there. That's what Bowtie is doing. That's the what. But the how you get there matters quite a lot. And that's part of our innovation story here is my marketing chops are maybe level 2 on a scale of 10. So forgive me, and maybe your audience will appreciate this.
Yeah.
I'll just give it to you straight. What we've tried to do and what we have done is we've built a decentralized SaaS offering. Now that might seem like an oxymoron. That might seem counterintuitive. SaaS is about someone else doing something on your behalf, right? Well, at the software layer, we are providing that type of managed singular experience of going somewhere and doing a thing. But where we differ is that we are not requiring you to send us all your stuff. There's no centralization in our product. And in order to achieve that, your audience may have come across the CAP theorem before. Have either of you heard that term, the CAP theorem?
Yep. Consistency, accessibility, partitionability.
Partition, tolerance. And then you can have 2, right?
Right.
In most systems, the theorem says you can have two of those things. And that's one of the reasons why so many offerings centralize their product. You're going multi-tenant. You're bringing everyone to you because then there's no partitions, right? Like you have one database, you have bring everyone to it. That's how most SaaS is done. But what if you could cancel that limitation? What if you could deploy software and have it mesh together and function like a centralized system, but in effect and in reality, it is distributed over every implementation of the software that you deploy in all of the locations that you deploy it. We achieve that using something called CRDT, conflict-free replicated data type. CRDT is the basis of the approach to our data layer and to our state tracking systems. I'll give you an example of where you will find CRDTs out in the wild. Redis, Valkey. You've heard of this solution before, I assume? They offer CRDT type functionality, and they're not alone. This is a common thing. It's a relatively recent approach to managing data, and it requires you to be really intentional about how you're structuring your information streams. But what it allows you to do is, I've heard it described as like Git, but without merge conflicts. Right? If you have two Git repositories, two people make different changes and you try to merge them together, every developer knows we have to reconcile. If you say A, I say B, we've got to pick, right? The CRDT system is designed to eliminate the potential for merge conflicts and be very intentional about the order in which changes are accepted in the system. And the result of this is the Bowtie solution is composed of two elements. One is the controller. We call it controller. It's a software appliance. And what we ask our customers to do is to deploy as many of these controllers as you can bear. Because the more of them you deploy, they mesh together and they share the state. You make a change on any controller, it's immediately replicated to all the controllers. If you make changes on two different controllers, they merge cleanly, no conflicts. In that way, the user feels like they're using a SaaS managed solution. You just go to the website, make your change, and it's there everywhere. That's what you expect with SaaS. And that's what we've done, but no central point of failure in the system. Every controller is a copy of the entire system, and the entire system is the controller.
So you kind of alluded to, some of the other solutions out there in the SASE, ZTNA space, and using OPP, other people's POPs out there. So no centralization, no OPP. So the controller, and I'm assuming you talked about two components. I'm assuming there's an agent component in here too.
That's right. That's the other component, yeah.
I want to dig into the controller for a second while you're here and ask, so is this in the architecture of Zero Trust? Is this the policy decision point, or is it also the policy enforcement point that's enforcing the access control? Or is it just the engine that's making the decisions around yes or no?
It's both of those things. So it's the control plane.
Okay.
It can be part of the data plane, but at a minimum, it's your control plane. This is where you go and express your desired state and your desired outcome. Drew can access resource A. JJ cannot access resource A.
Aw.
I'm sorry. Would you want me to reverse it?
Yeah.
In any case, it's the control plane where that is done. And then depending on what the destination is, it can be a part of the enforcement. So for example, the controllers are the gateways to private resources. If you've got a VPC, you deploy a controller or two or three or as many I can convince you to do in your VPC, and then the resources behind that VPC are accessed by that set of controllers. So it can be a gateway, and it is the control plane that distills the policy and distributes it to all of the agents that are acting on behalf of the user to connect them to what they're trying to get access to.
So if I can run a controller in a VPC, you gave an example if I'm trying to protect access to public cloud apps. Presumably, I can also run a controller somewhere on-prem if I'm trying to protect access to private applications.
Absolutely.
What about software as a service where I can't install something on Salesforce?
Right. The solution space for gating public resources typically falls along two lines. One is either force all your traffic through a permitted origin or enter into the identity flow. And the Bowtie solution allows both. So you could, if you wanted to, say, limit ingress into Salesforce from some resource that you control. Something that we regularly run into is people talking about like shared IP addresses. I have to buy an IP address from someone else in order for that IP address to be associated to me. That concept doesn't apply in our solution because the network resources that you're using with Bowtie belong to you from the jump. You're not leasing time on my stuff. You are using the Bowtie software to get better use out of the resources that you already have. So you could anchor for origin filtering if you wanted to. I don't love that personally.
Well, that's just a horrible idea for several reasons. Unless you have to, it's a temporary.
Exactly.
Well, I'm just thinking sort of the traditional deployment method where it sounds like I could have a controller on premises and force all of my outbound traffic through that to control access to SaaS apps. Or if I've got branch offices, I can put a controller there again to force that run through. But you're saying I don't have to do it that way. There's an identity flow aspect as well.
You do it at the identity layer, right? So that distributed control plane can serve as a bump in the authentication flow, right? So you have an IDP, whatever your IDP is. You have a relying party. In this case, we're talking about Salesforce. And then the normal flow is that user goes to log in, Salesforce kicks them to the IDP, you get interrogated and get sent back with a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Mm-hmm.
With the Bowtie solution, there's a third actor there in that Salesforce doesn't talk directly to the IDP. It talks to Bowtie first. Bowtie then leverages its relationship with your IDP and enriches the response. The thumbs up or thumbs down isn't just that you had a password or that you had a two-factor or both or more. It is now also where you are, what you're using, and the posture conditions that factor into the device that's under your fingertips that we know more about before the authentication assertion is released to the SaaS application.
So this is where the agent comes in then, yeah?
That's exactly right.
Before we get to an agent, I think a lot of people, when we hear controllers, we think about like a 1U piece of metal we're shoving in somewhere. I'm assuming just because of how and where this can get deployed, this is maybe more like an agent. It's more ephemeral. It's not a hunk of metal necessarily, but it is a piece of software you can deploy that is acting as a controller.
That's right. So it's not metal, it's not plastic. It is a software appliance. So if you are running in AWS, you would reach out to us in the marketplace, launch an AMI. Same thing for all of the public cloud providers. If you have Hyper-V, if you have VMware, if you're moving from VMware to Proxmox or something like that, we have an image for you to run. And it's fully integrated. It's based off of NixOS because we wanted to do it right from the jump and be very, very specific and declarative with our builds. So it's a software image that is deployed. And my commitment to you and to your audience is wherever you run, we will be there for you. But it's not hardware, it's not plastic.
Sounds like lyrics to a new SASE song.
Cue Brian Adams.
Well, it just shouldn't get in the way, right? Your selection of compute and execution, we will fit into the model of where your resources live. In order for our approach of being decentralized and living with you wherever you are, we have to do it this way. We have to run where you're executing.
So you also mentioned the agent component, and we started to get into that, talking about that's, I think, how you tie into the identity option. Can you talk a little bit more about the agent and what it's doing?
Yes. I first want to talk about agentless. No agent, right? Because if there's no agent, that's better. That's the pitch. There are things that you can do without installing software on a device. There are sleights of hand. You can make inferences, you can make deductions, and hopefully you can act on those successfully. But there are limits to how far you can go in manipulating traffic flows, in getting really deep granular context about what device is making the connections, and the basis of trust, like all the way down to a hardware root. There are limits when you are agentless. When we started building Bowtie, we knew that we needed the full spectrum of capabilities that can only be achieved with an agent, software that's installed on the device. I am as leery as the next person about agent fatigue and too many pieces of software to install and manage. However, in order to deliver the network in the way that we have envisioned, we require the ability to have a full socket on your device, have full introspection of the device, and on your behalf, select the right pathway for the right stream, the right flow, the right packet destination, and do it at the origin, at the inception of the request, because that's where these decisions need to happen. The existing players, many of them will say, send us your packets first. We'll rip into them. We'll do things to them. We'll build a parallel internet. And that's where the magic will happen. Justin and I, we call that phase 2 of the evolution. If you say phase 1 of the evolution was VPN concentrators in the back office that everyone connected to, but only that one location, hub and spoke, first iteration. Second iteration is, we'll do the same thing, but we will multiply that back office by 10,000, 100,000, a million, POPs everywhere. You'll use our POP network. Brute force it still, but move your traffic somewhere else and then do something with it. And then the third phase of the evolution, which I believe will be the last phase, but time will judge me on this.
Everything old is always new again, so.
That's right. These decisions move all of this thought process down to the user, down to the edge, down to the device that they're using, because that's where the magic happens. That's where the request is made. That's where the request is fulfilled. Right there under the user's fingertips. There's no latency. There's no extra hops. And some of the problems that arise when you are doing unnatural things to traffic flows and security streams like TLS, you have a better opportunity to implement them more gracefully when it's at the inception rather than trying to bust it in the middle. if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm a fan of agents. I think that might be surprising for some people, but in the security space, especially, if you want that level of granularity and visibility and the consistent visibility, especially in a posture change, you don't have a choice. And the agents can, if you need them, do other things like start to correlate, NIC interfaces across the device to understand that this is still that device instead of looking like 2 or 3 different devices. And most of the agents these days, I mean, you guys, I don't know about yours, I haven't seen it, but most, they're very invisible to the user. It's transparent. It's not the thing that they're going to hit Task Manager and it's eating up, 80% of their CPU and memory. It just kind of works in the background and does what it needs to do.
Recede into the background, fall back into the bush. It needs to not be the main character on stage, right?
I just had a Family Guy image in my head from Peter.
I think it's Simpsons, but yes.
Yeah, that's Simpsons, yeah. If the spotlight is brought to you for any reason, we've done it wrong. The agent is there to, as you say, do things that you otherwise could not do, but absolutely is not there to be something that you even have to think about.
So I like this idea because one of the pain points and challenges, I think, when we first started in like the ZTNA SASE world is we had all of these vendors that were, cloud first, cloud focused. And therefore, everything that they did, like you just described, was routed in and through the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't scale. It doesn't make sense when you've got a user and a resource that are both co-located with one another.
Exactly.
And now you're sending stuff out into the internet, and then you're paying for that second overlay of somebody else's POP.
Mm-hmm.
It's stitching a TLS tunnel, basically, into that other resource, and you're hairpinning once or twice to get to the thing that's down the hall. Okay, so we're using agents. We're using these kind of, virtualized software-based, controllers in front of the assets that we're connecting into. How is that connecting, and what are the rest of the juicy things that you're able to do from a security standpoint for those devices and users?
First of all, I couldn't have said it better myself in terms of the picture you just drew of how traffic is moving around and kind of the artificial nature of forcing things to go longer distance, go somewhere where it's not meant to go. And that presumes, by the way, that everything is working flawlessly, that there isn't a routing error, that there isn't, some cross-border traffic flows that now what you're looking at on your computer is not in the language that you expect it to be. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like all of those problems arise when you are trying to force an unnatural condition onto the device. Our connection topology is full mesh, right? So what we're using under the hood is WireGuard for connectivity. I hope everyone hearing this will be delighted by that because it's the right way to do it. One packet out, one packet in, point to multi-point. The reasons that Jason Donenfield came forward and said there needs to be an improvement in the space, all of the thesis behind WireGuard is why we have chosen it, and it fully aligns with the user experience that we're looking to achieve. That is, no penalty for constructing your network this way, as fast as your local internet connection should be able to go. Now, if you're sitting on a 400 gig link and that's part of your home network topology or what have you, okay, I have not seen WireGuard scale to 400 gig yet, but I would argue the potential is probably there if we push it hard enough. In any case, WireGuard allows connections to establish immediately. Whatever you're using right now, if you're considering it a VPN, if you're considering it a remote access solution, and whether it's your today's solution or a solution you've experienced recently, there is like a connection phase that is your user aware, right? Like I have to hit the button first of all, and then maybe the editor could insert that dial-up modem screech.
I can do it for you.
It doesn't happen that way anymore, but it's in effect what's happening. You don't hear it, but like a whole bunch of stuff has to happen. And then you're good, unless the connection breaks, if you move locations. And then you have to do it again. When we do this with WireGuard, one packet out in, I mean, I don't know if my snaps are getting picked up on the microphone, and I'm certainly not being observed by the audience, but like, it's that fast, right? Like, before you can think about it, it's done. That's one aspect that is critical to the user experience element of disappearing into the bush. The second is point to multi-point, right? There's no backhaul location. Every agent connects to every controller and it fans out a mesh. And so when you're trying to move traffic, you literally take the most efficient path. Unless you're trying to engineer a different solution, the default option is the shortest path through the internet to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm going to break this into two categories. Category one is for private access, things that are not on the public internet. So your origin, we take the shortest path to get to your origin, wherever that origin is, or destination, I should say. Origin is a CDN concept. But if you reverse it, you're trying to get to somewhere, the system should take the shortest path. It shouldn't deviate, it shouldn't turn, it shouldn't twist, just get me there.
So if you're in the same building or same campus, you're going to take the direct path there instead of going out to the internet a few times and swirling back in.
And it's a little bit better than that because, yes, no swirl. I like that term, no swirl. But more than no swirl, you get the benefit of the efficient encryption underneath all of those connections, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're on wireless, wireline, whatever it is. You get the benefit of the WireGuard encryption on top of that. It's hyper efficient. It's close. And like a couple of years ago, there was another vulnerability in wireless security, and I forget the acronym used for it. But like if you're depending on 802.11x, if you're depending on WPA 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, if there's a flaw there, think of this as a defense in depth strategy. You have WireGuard running over the transport and then your protocol on top of it for all these connections. And so, yes, you're still connecting to the device that's right next to you, but you get the benefit of a defense in depth layer for the encryption and the connection just for free. And I think that's brilliant.
And it checks all of the compliance boxes too. Like we have so many, our municipalities, even universities have CJIS requirements because they're processing like criminal justice data because they have public safety or law enforcement, all the way up through, of course, the normal, PCI DSS, HIPAA, all that jazz. And, one of the questions is always, how do we downscope, outscope, rescope, in-scope to narrow down what we have to do because we, for most networks, don't have layer 2 encryption.
How natural is this? You just said something, criminal justice data, your personal health records. Like when you think about these things, you have to personalize it to really underscore the significance of what's at stake. I told you I was operating satellites. Those satellites meant a whole hell of a lot to me. You're telling me your audience isn't going to see me, but this is what it looked like, okay? So I'm showing a Christmas tree ornament version of the satellite that I spent a decade of my life working with. I care a lot about this, and I do not want anyone else touching this. But, it's just a spacecraft. It can be replaced. And we live in an age where it's not if your information's been leaked, but how many times. As we start talking about building systems to prevent that, to mitigate those types of concerns, how natural is it to be able to say that I hold my records close to myself on my network. I don't ship it to someone else. I'm not outsourcing my trust model. And using a solution like Bowtie, I'm bringing encryption to all of the base connections, all of them by default. I know who is accessing everything. I can control it down to a very granular level of authorized devices. And another interesting aspect that for the people who are the operators in your environment, I think you will really resonate is so often the demand is do everything I just said, add the encryption, add the zero trust awareness, add all those things to an existing network, right? It's a network. Very often networks get created, then value is generated, and then we have to add security on top later after value's already been generated. It's a cat and mouse game, and we're usually on the losing side of that race. And so how do you do that? How do you take a network that's already existing, that has production users, and it can't go down, and the changes that you make have to go through a lot of rigor? How do you take that and remove assumptions? Zero trust is about removing assumptions, right? How do you eliminate those assumptions, add security, add encryption, add identity awareness, but don't rebuild anything? The way that you do that, the reason we built Bowtie is you overlay these concepts on top. The network exists, but if you move access to the network to a platform like Bowtie, that knows who you are, where you're coming from, provides this encryption, you can do it to an existing system without rebuilding it. You just deploy the controllers there. You're not fundamentally re-architecting your network. You're just adding this layer on top, and it's very natural.
So does this mean in this approach, agent to controller, where I've got an encrypted tunnel essentially, I'm thinking of VPN client to VPN gateway. Is that a fair comparison?
Only in the sense of that there is encrypted connectivity between 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
When you use those letters, VPN, it's an understood term. There's just a lot of connotation there. And typically VPN gateways do not allow the point to multi-point connectivity flow, the full mesh flow that we're talking about, right?
Well, my intention was I'm setting up essentially, VPN, it would be an IPsec tunnel from my client to the VPN gateway. Traffic is encrypted across that link and then decrypted at the gateway and going on to wherever its endpoint is. Is that what I'm thinking?
That's right. Yes, in that model. Yeah, the only color I would add is it's more like a DM VPN, dynamic multi-VPN, right? It's like you don't have to administer and worry about every point of the link like it was hand-woven fine jewelry or art or what have you, right? I'm trying to imagine something that requires a lot of personal effort and involvement. DMVPN, the Cisco solution and its open alternative, the idea was you register and it just starts creating all these links for you in the way that you would have done it if you had the time and energy to do it all by hand.
Mm-hmm.
The mesh that we're talking about that's powered by WireGuard and enabled by our distributed data layer establishes all these connections for you, very efficient. I've heard different terms for this, right? Microtunnels, microsegmentation, all these concepts are all baked into what we're talking about here.
Sure.
The agent connects to the controller. The controller is adjacent to the resources you're trying to connect to.
Yeah.
We do a couple of interesting things. Since this is a technical audience, I'm going to say this. I'm going to get hate mail. Bowtie was born in the future, so it uses IPv6 by default for everything and allows for access to v4 as the past that it is or was. Look, I'm not trying to get flamed here.
I think you're going to get a lot of love for that one.
Okay.
Honestly, I feel like if you're talking about IPv6 native, that's maybe more of an issue for folks than having an agent. And I don't know how you feel about that, but
it can be, right? Like, here's the thing. You don't have to interact with it. The transport, the IP packets moving back and forth and addressing and destination, it's all kind of, when we say SaaS, managed software on your behalf, we're doing that all for you underneath. You don't have to be an expert in IPv6. You don't even have to deal with it. There are some advantages to the vastness of IPv6, right? Like, one common problem is connecting two networks together that share the same address space, v4, right?
Mhm.
Let me make it simple. I launched a VPC in AWS, and then I just took the defaults. And then another company did the same thing. And then those two companies got together and they wanted to do more together, right? Are we rebuilding our VPCs? Are we renumbering our networks? You could try to create pinpricks to connect the two, but usually, and in fact, for all of our customers, when we first encounter them, what they tell us they're doing is that I have VPN A, I have VPN B, and I toggle between them when I need to work on either side of the fence. That's one way to do it. Another way would be IPv6 native solution like Bowtie, where the entirety of the IPv4 address space can fit into a IPv6 prefix, and we can abstract that away from the user, put it behind unique DNS names. So let's call it site.a.apple.com, and I just use that as a fruit, not as the company. Let's call it, what's your favorite fruit? Give me something.
Pears.
Well, Apple, but it's
Site a.pair.com and site b.pair.com. If you have that level of granularity for your DNS, your zones, and even if you don't have it, if you could add it, if you could create it, we can then take specific overlapping v4 networks, abstract that complexity away from the user, and they just put in site a.pair.com and it goes to VPC A, or site b.pair.com and it goes to VPC B, even though the addresses are conflicting and their computer otherwise wouldn't know how to route to conflicting addresses. When we wrap it in v6, we can get that done.
Yeah. And I think, any network engineer who's had to manage complex routing is going to be a fan of that. And everybody uses mobile phones that are all just auto-magically using v6. And it's just what we do at scale.
That's right, exactly.
So, okay, I want to come back around because you were talking about, if you had to pull out the acronym bucket. Now, you do, if you want to work for an analyst agency, get paid per acronym. So if you don't like the ones that are there, you could switch jobs and then make up a new one and you get paid tens of thousands of dollars. But you pulled SASE. So that Secure Access Service Edge indicates that instead of just connectivity, you're doing other things. So what are the other security capabilities?
Right. The capabilities are the same. Private access, secure web gateway implemented on the device, right? I'm not shipping your traffic off to my controller to have decisions made about it. I do it at the origin where the request is made. There are other players in the market who believe that that is the right way to move forward. And frankly, let me just say full stop, that is the right way to move forward. Implement these policies on the device as close to the user as possible. Make it a zero latency experience for them, but still provide the protection. Secure web gateway, private access, and then the SaaS brokering, right? Enriching those connections. That's where we're starting. There's not going to be a change in the Bowtie offering with regard to the value that customers get out of it. The value is the same in terms of the capabilities, but it is so much better because it's implemented in a way that does not require you to just dump everything off somewhere else and hope for the best. It moves the system closer to the people who are actually using it in ways that improve performance and improve the security profile and the user experience in a way that you can't achieve when you're just taking tenancy up in someone else's network. That's what Bowtie is doing.
What about firewalling? Because if you're going to say we're in the SASE space, I have to at least feel like I've got L4 capabilities, if not L7.
Bowtie is a platform. It is something that, as far as I know, and perhaps I will get some references from your audience, but as far as I know, does not exist in the way that we built it. A solution that allows for decentralization and all this connectivity joined together. That platform, on top of it, we've deployed those three capabilities I talked about. But when you think about like SD-WAN or firewall as a service, those concepts, the platform certainly allows for that to happen. The platform allows for, and right now we're focused on human access, but the machine-to-machine story is as enabled by this platform as the human to machine story. It's just where we started building, right? Like if it were easy to completely decentralize your state in this way, everyone would do it this way. It was not an easy thing for us to solve for, but now that it is solved, the number of potential applications at the network layer for us to achieve covers the entire spectrum of the, as you say, the pay by letter acronym soup that's available for us here. And more to the point, I believe an enterprise network product of this sort should address all of the enterprise's needs. From my operator days, I did not enjoy duct taping multiple solutions from multiple vendors together, or the idea that it's one company I'm doing business with, but it feels like their products were built by complete aliens to one another, not even the same species, right? Has anyone experienced this? Have you experienced this? Like, it's the same logo, but the product, my goodness.
So many names that are coming to mind.
Yeah.
I'm biting my tongue, but yes, they're all out there.
So the question is that I guess I feel like I didn't get the question answered though. Do you have firewalling capability or is that coming?
Yes. So when you say firewalling, I'm going to generalize it a little bit to say that certain traffic is permitted, other traffic is not permitted. It's less of the legacy concept of a literal fire break against the world. It's more of every flow that has to go through has to be authorized. I'm not really foot stomping here about the zero trust elements of our solution because I consider it table stakes. Every packet that moves through the system has to conform to, yes, I allowed this from the source to this destination. The color I would add to it, though, is that we are concerned primarily about traffic coming into the Bowtie platform. And the general concept of like firewalling, trying to protect sites or stuff like that, that is not exactly what we're doing right at the moment.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of, particularly if we're thinking L7, like first app ID and then being able to enforce policies around application type, but then also deep packet inspection, IPS signature-based inspection. It sounds like that's not in the menu yet.
We are operating not in the layer 7 stream. We're not brokering the connections and then deciding, like, think of it like a reverse proxy. Path A is okay, path B is not okay. However, I will say that the platform enables me to do that. And the question is about customer demand. And there are real needs, for example, for like, and I'm going to get real specific, okay? Like SSH connections, knowing what was sent over that connection, what were the keystrokes, who did it, being really selective about who's able to make these types of connections. That level of application brokering is absolutely part of our story. We have to be able to do that. Another common one is RDP. If you have RDP into a destination that is absolutely mission critical, you need to know what happened, to be able to record those sessions, things of that sort. That has to be part of the story. That is what the enterprise requires. Whether you agree that it's the best way to achieve an outcome, that's separate. But as long as these technologies and these practices are present, you have to have the capability of brokering them and enriching the security story for them. And Bowtie, we articulate ourselves as enterprise network fabric. And this is part of the fabric. So we have to do it.
So it sounds like there's almost dipping into a little bit of built-in privileged access management just by virtue of, with the controllers, you have that visibility and control and you can audit and you can record all of that.
Yes. When you say privileged access management, two things jump to my mind. One is, what resources may I utilize? And then the second is like, what changes can I make to my local machine? Our story is more about the former rather than the latter.
Yeah.
I do not want to interfere with what your pseudo policy is. I use that as a generalization. But in terms of the network is what connects all these systems together. It carries so much value and it has so much opportunity to be a more useful ally in the rendition of service than what we're doing for it. If I told you at the beginning, my earliest demands were just simply make sure those packets get to their destination. But once you take care of that basic need, then there's a lot more that really needs to be considered about the contents and character of those packets. And that's what the Bowtie platform allows people to do.
I feel like I could talk to you guys for hours, but just a couple more questions before we conclude. First, if we're talking about definitions, SASE has to include some kind of SD-WAN. Based on what you're talking about, I don't hear SD-WAN in the terms that I think about SD-WAN, in that I have a device that allows me to connect to multiple connections that I can use simultaneously or fail over as needed. So what is your answer about this SD-WAN issue? And Justin, I think it's your turn to say something.
I haven't said much. I've been allowing William to do his thing. I want to maybe instead answer that question with a more broad outlook of the market. I mean, we were talking earlier about these acronyms and SASE and what that means. And, of course, one of the requirements of SASE, which we've talked about now, is that you have a certain number of POPs and a certain availability standard and things along those lines. And I think that our view is ultimately SASE is yesterday's answer to these problems. The market is moving towards a new approach. We hope to be at the forefront of that approach, but we think of it more like an edge security fabric. And from that light, the question kind of comes up, and we've talked about this with customers, of whether or not you really even need an SD-WAN. If you think about what you were doing with it prior, and then you think about the new flexibility that a solution like this provides you, if you can accomplish similar outputs doing it in a new architecture, then maybe you don't even really need that. And you can start to think about minimizing your infrastructure across the board at various sites. Maybe you don't need the same firewall infrastructure that you had before. And so it's really a reframing of how we think about it, I think, is the answer there.
I'll add that the Bowtie solution is meant to work in conjunction with the network that you have today to augment it, to make it better, and make it yours. To the extent that we face a lot of demand for things like link aggregation, failover, that's certainly within the gambit of the platform. We already have the concept of unified policy distributed across every controller, wherever those controllers are. And so extending that out to concepts of managing underlying WAN links for customers, it's not beyond the pale. It's just not our initial focus.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm sitting here just like digesting all of this, and I'm going to have to wrap my head around the whole SASE is gone thing. I see what you're saying, and actually you guys are doing things differently. So I'm really intrigued by this, and I'm really interested in follow-up conversation. But for right now, you guys are starting, right? You're getting going. Who's your target best fit vertical and size? Because I noticed on your site, like from the pricing, you're very overt about, sharing what's included and what your tiers are. And there's even a free tier for people to kind of play around with it. So what markets and what size organizations are best fit for you?
So we are certainly targeting enterprise organizations. The use cases that we are seeing most frequently are popping up within financial services, within aerospace or space industries, within retail, within healthcare, right? So we talked earlier about, compliance, data security, controlling your own destiny, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, which is something that actually our customers have said to us. And so the industries that we focus on, the industries that make the most sense for us are those. That being said, we also believe that this should be as easy as possible to use, and that every company should be trying to strive for the best possible security. And one of the things that we're trying to do is enable that. And so there's also no reason that we shouldn't be working with, a 15-person startup.
I'll add that I have spent so long in the operator's chair, I think every operator will understand this. You always look up to the bigger fish. You always look up to see who's the biggest, most sophisticated player and what are they doing. And what I would posit to you is that if the trendsetters, if the people concerned most with their security are looking to solutions like Bowtie to make sure that there's no gap, no assumption, no variance, no daylight between them and their security posture, but if that solution also does not require Fortune 500 resources to operate, if it's no harder than the click and go solution, well, why wouldn't everyone do it that way?
Well, William and Justin, that wraps up our time together. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's episode and for being willing to come in and have this conversation. I feel like we dug in and got some good information. But if folks want to find out more, where should they go?
So they can get to the website at bowtie.security, or specific to this episode, bowtie.security/packetpushers. And beyond that, you can also send us an email directly, sales@bowtie.security.
Yeah, and reach out. Let's talk.
Yeah, then that's great. If you're listening, we do recommend bowtie.security/packetpushers because that'll help them know that it came from Packet Pushers, which does help us in the long run. So if you are interested and you want to look it up, bowtie.security/packetpushers. Again, William and Justin, thank you for being here today for the conversation. And of course, thanks to you for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If you have a topic you want us to cover, you can find us on LinkedIn or at packetpushers.net/community, where you can join our free Slack channel with other IT and security pros. If you have a comment, correction, or question, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. We do love follow-up, and we appreciate when listeners reach out. And as always, make sure you're doing your security push-ups.